Our journey as Western Jesus begins in a fierce and unforgiving snowstorm. A group of outlaws on the run with no choice but to press through the unforgiving weather to find some shelter. The gang trudges through the cold and eventually stumbles across a little shack where Miss Grimshaw mocks up some homemade clout goggles for Davy and Dutch gives an inspiring speech about global warming. I pull up the weapon wheel and stare at it in absolute disbelief as I realize that the lasso is actually not yet available. So in a matter of minutes, any sense of a plan I had for the beginning of the game was swiftly drop-kicked out of existence, meaning that the perfect ratio for this area was indeed 3 knockouts by me and 4 kills from the boys. Unfortunately, what isn't so consistent is, of course, Micah's loyalty, because for some completely unknown reason that I still cannot figure out, right when he's needed most, Micah decides it's time for him to leave. That's it. He gets up from his wagon, runs over to his horse, and leaves the shootout before I can even properly comprehend what's going on. Did he forget to turn the oven off before leaving home? Did he decide that a life of theft and murder was no longer the life for him? I don't know. Maybe he decided to go and star in another Stuart Little movie, but the bottom line is, I picked up my gun, picked up my hat, I bonded with the spooked horse inside the stable who told me his name was Frank, really cool guy actually, and after a long chat about our favourite movies and what makes them so good, we decided to leave the stable and finally end the mission. With Davy murdered and the perpetrators still unaccounted for, it comes as great news when Pearson informs us that the deer who killed him has been spotted in the woods not too far away. Charles agrees to come too, as he insists this deer is a merciless assassin with unbelievable abilities like none we've ever seen, so we gear up and trek back into the snow on a hunt for revenge in the name of Dave. We get the option to either take the lead ourselves or allow Dutch to make the first move. And obviously, since I won't be unloading any of the bullets into the unsuspecting O'Driscolls myself, I let Dutch engage them first to initiate the shootout. I sat back while the Dutch Vanderland began the shootout by hitting the pole in front of him. Definitely an interesting strategy, but who was I to question his expertise? And to make things worse, all of the enemies I had encountered so far needed to be disarmed twice, as getting rid of their rifle caused them to draw their sidearm instead. An extreme example of this being our good friend 3-Gun Gary, who, living up to his name, had 3 guns that needed to be disarmed rather than 2. I'm beginning to think that maybe all of Arthur's highly honourable actions have started to take effect on the ones around him. Because when I say that I discovered something that saved this playthrough, what I really mean is that I discovered someone who saved this playthrough. I was at a complete loss. I had tried more strategies than what I could possibly fit into this video. From attempting to get the enemies to shoot each other to bobsledding with Frank, I'd tried it all. And at this point, it was nothing short of idiotic for me to assume that anything would result in a better outcome than 8 knockouts by me and 6 kills from the boys. But then it happened. I decided to try disarming enemies individually again. I don't know why, but I had the random impulse to just give it one more shot. But this time, I brought them one by one to Dutch, Bill and Micah so the enemy could be killed without anyone having to move up. I used my old route to get into the shack and disarm this enemy before he repositioned out into the open, then led him around the back to where Dutch, Bill and Micah had taken cover. But instead of him being killed immediately like I had originally expected, he got Micah in a hold of some sort, something I hadn't seen in any of my attempts so far. Bill spun around and turned the enemy's face into mashed potato, but Micah just stood there for a moment completely still, almost as though he was contemplating something. And then, in a split second, he pulled a knife from his pocket, and he stood there, staring into my soul, almost like he could see the desperation after all of my failed attempts. And I don't know what happened inside that man's brain, but Micah snapped. Micah didn't hesitate. He began climbing the ladder and there was absolutely no way that I could stop him. He reached the top, and I'd never been closer to a heart attack in my life when he threw the enemy from the top and came falling down with him. I expected at least one of them to die. I even prepared myself to see the mission failed screen, but both of them rose to their feet immediately and began fighting. I ended up tying the enemy after realizing he had a knife too, as I couldn't risk Micah dying here at all. But after Micah not only launched him off the water tower, but also attacked him over and over on the ground with no result, I realized that this enemy was also one that was not scripted to be handled by anyone but Arthur, which meant that after over 100 attempts at just this one mission, I could finally say for sure that knocking 8 enemies out was definitely not the minimum. And thanks to none other than Micah Bell and his bitch slap PTSD, we were able to get this far with the perfect ratio of 2 knockouts by me and 14 kills from the boys. Meaning that our current total for Arthur stands at 0 kills and only 5 knockouts. But this, unfortunately, was a success that we could only enjoy for a very short moment.
Oh shit! Look out! More of the bastards coming out of the trees!
Finally marking the end of this segment, which I actually managed to get through with 0 knockouts and 0 kills. Arthur's saint status was only growing stronger, and soon he would gain the ability to walk on water. The boys began searching for anything useful to the V-Bucks robbery. Arthur discovered some dynamite while Bill discovered a new fetish, and as everybody prepares to leave for the heist, there was one question on Arthur's lips that had gone unanswered all this time.
Who is Leviticus Cornwall?
Hosea began to explain the man they were about to rob, the man they were about to make a great enemy out of. Leviticus Cornwall was the most powerful businessman on the planet, the controller of all V-Bucks, the CEO of Epic Games. This series is something else. There's one thing that these very early attempts taught me, is that Lenny can absolutely not hold his own. It was immediately obvious that the primary issue of this mission would be getting Lenny to survive long enough for us to complete it. And I just want to make one thing clear, that is not Lenny's fault. We all love Lenny. He's a sweet, innocent cowboy who's just out to prove himself. He's one of the nicest people in the entire game. But God, I would be lying if I said I didn't want to wrap a fence paling around his head by the time this mission was over. I mean, sure, Micah needed a little help when he was busy assassinating every O'Driscoll in a 500-meter radius, but Lenny, being a beginner in the outlaw game and all, he was just a little more fragile, and I was beyond ready to try something new with the train conductor. I wanted to see if I could maybe jump onto the metal box he was hiding behind, and even though I was pretty sure it wouldn't work, I figured it was still worth it since it was such a low-risk thing to try. But if there's one thing that I've learned so far while making this series, it's that things almost never go according to plan. I'd like to think I've been, pretty patient while making this series so far, There have been some pretty frustrating challenges already, but I'd like to think I've gotten through most of it quite calmly, been pretty chill about whatever problems have arisen, but something about seeing the train conductor's shovel draw me to it like Arthur's nose was made out of fucking iron had me in such disbelief that all I could do was pause the game, and it does things to people. And so I needed a moment to reflect. If I really was going to have to let our good boy Arthur throw this innocent, shovel-wielding train conductor off a train to his death, I would at least take some time to reflect before destroying Arthur's reputation as the goodest boy in the West. Having almost completed my journey around the entire map, the train was just about pulling into where the heist had begun. I decided since we were now much closer to Frank again, I'd give calling him another try, just in case we could mount him from the front of the train and avoid the murder we were being forced into committing. And although he proved his unmatched loyalty once again, even going as far as to ride alongside the train now, the prompt to jump onto him from the carriage never showed, and eventually we were separated once again by a tunnel, frustrated, disheartened, and reluctant to move forward. Forced into killing for the first time to progress. Something I didn't expect for us to face so soon, and something I didn't want Western Jesus to have to encounter at all. But considering that the objective was on the other side of a scripted sequence, and having tried everything that I had so far as well, it seemed as though there was absolutely no way to bypass this. And so I walked over to Lenny, picked up the restrained enemy I'd placed in front of him earlier, and decided to move him further away. I can't remember my reasoning for this exactly, but I honestly think I was just moving him out of boredom while preparing to carry out the very first kill of this playthrough. But when I dropped the guard onto the ground, something different happened. I accidentally knocked him out. And while my impulse reaction was to be annoyed, considering my plan was to completely bypass this knockout by leaving him tied up, his unconsciousness initiated something that I hadn't seen yet. After Lenny's reluctance to move forward this entire time, he ran straight past me and towards the train controls, copping a shovel to the forehead in the process. And just like that, every ounce of hope I'd just lost came flooding back in an instant.
When you're trapped within a world of violence and murder, of gunshots and explosions, of train conductors and phantom shovels, things become just a little bit complicated when you attempt to go against the grain. You see, stories are slowly beginning to spread across the West. Stories of a single man and his horse on a mission like none you ever seen. Stories of the pair making their way through mountains of men without taking a single life. Some claim they've actually had encounters with the mystery duo, going as far to say that the horse is the man's protector, that he can break a man's spine with his thoughts. But I don't know about all that. People make up fantasy stories like this all the time. I mean, last I heard somebody was running around, swearing on their life that he saw him roaming around the south of Valentine, or something like that. Well, I sure as hell don't believe it, but can't say it wouldn't be nice to have someone to watch over us hard-working folk every now and again. Things ain't been this bad in a long while.
Last episode, I asked you all to send me some suggestions for what Arthur should look like for the rest of the series. Now, I find this detail to be very important because if Arthur's going to be running around as everybody's holy savior until the end of time, he can't be getting around in the same drip he was born in, okay? I mean, this is character development. The only kind of guideline I set for these suggestions was that Arthur's outfit should suit the theme of the series. He shouldn't look like he's gonna follow you home and steal your rock collection, okay? Now, there were a ton of great suggestions, a ton of them. So many that they would need their own video if I was to show them all off individually. But yeah, I just wanted to thank you all so much for getting involved with that. It was really cool seeing all of your suggestions, but there was one suggestion that seemed to climb above the rest. A suggestion that was so highly requested by so many people that it'd be a crime for me not to pick it. The next step in human evolution. Arthur wearing this outfit would radiate so much power that the sun would just pack up and piss off to another solar system. Unstoppable, stylish. Look, I arrived to Saint Denis, took in a nice deep breath of the disgustingly polluted air, and made my way into the clothing store. I picked up a slick new pair of white pinstripe pants and some cream crossback suspenders before standing outside in the sun for a while so I could marvel at Arthur's new level of holiness. Frank decided last minute it was probably better that he stayed outside due to his ongoing battle with alcoholism, but Arthur was more than ready to turn water to cheap whiskey and forget his own name. This was similar to the previous melee fight in the sense that I managed to push the enemy through an invisible wall. Again, going past this point really limited your control of Arthur since the game obviously doesn't want you past that point at all. All you can really do is spam grab to continue pushing the enemy until you're eventually locked into this animation that brings you all the way back into the saloon. Once this animation starts, there is no way to break from this man's grasp. I just accepted that I would have to knock this guy out. I'd say we can at least consider that not a knockout. So that's a plus, I suppose, but counting the enemy in the hotel room that we'd just had to KO before, we were now 4 knockouts deep. 4. That is the most knockouts in one sitting we've ever encountered so far. And it was obvious that this really did cut Arthur quite deep. His mission is to do good. It's his life goal. When things really begin to challenge that goal, it's understandable to want to give up on it. It's understandable for Arthur and Frank to want to abandon their duties completely when times get tough. But they don't. They push forward. They search tirelessly for more ways to spread good. These failures only motivate them even more because they know that the West needs saving. And they know that they're the only duo who can save it. They figure the camp's environmental activist Kieran, who has tied himself to this tree in protest of deforestation, would be a good place to start. But first, it was time to rescue the magician they came for. Now that magician had been stuck above that chimney without a bath for God only knows how long, so we did him the extra courtesy of giving him a clean, and he rewarded us with a total of $600, leaving a portion to the gang and $100 to us. The Strawberry Jail was absolutely nothing to scoff at, as its appearance was very much a facade. Everybody who knows anything about the West will tell you, if you get thrown in the Strawberry Jail, there is no escaping that town. You may escape the chains that have you bound, you might even escape the walls that have you trapped, but if you are a prisoner to that town, you will never leave the confines of Strawberry alive. Because for all the money that is skimped on the facilities themselves is a massively funded, highly skilled security detail who have been injecting high potency miracle tonics from the moment they were born. Their purpose is to stop you from leaving that town. They are solely dedicated to that mission, and God help anyone who gets in the way of that mission. Besides, this guy, this guy's mustache must have been enchanted with bullet resistance or something, because none of Micah's bullets bothered him one bit. How sweet is this man? This mission would go mind-blowingly well. No kills, no knockouts, pretty much smooth sailing until this. With all active enemies seemingly dealt with, Michael was left with a chance to really think about everything that had happened to him so far on this journey, and the past trauma of that initial slap that changed his life forever just hits him at the absolute worst moment possible. He is frozen in contemplation, pondering his place in the universe, really asking himself life's biggest questions, and there is no breaking him. Hosea had just gotten word that there was some copycats in our midst. Way back in episode 2, we were tasked with hunting down the killer of our good friend Davey. A deer with absolutely no remorse had taken his life, and although it was unfortunate that we were forced into killing the deer with a bow for revenge, it was a good thing that he had been taken off the streets, because he was bound to strike again. But his legacy had not been stamped out with his death the way people were expecting, no, in fact, it had been carried on stronger than ever. Hosea now had word that a rabbit operating just west of the Grizzlies was now in control of the animal's criminal underworld, and he was reported to be directly responsible for the murder of 12 innocent travelers. Arthur, of course, agreed to help him as he wanted to ensure no more lives were lost, but he wanted to preferably avoid taking the life of the rabbit as well. So Arthur was definitely in, but surprisingly, Frank was out. You see, when Frank was granted the power of telekinesis, he was also plagued with the fear of rabbits in an effort to balance out his power. Arthur insisted to Hosea that there was to be no more murder, however, as he strongly believed a good stern talking to would set any remaining thugs down a much better path. What I had completely forgotten was that Reverend Swanson somehow manages to piss Kratos off in the 5 seconds that he goes missing. Now, this didn't seem like such a problem at first. I mean, I could just pull out my lasso and... But that's when I stumbled across something kind of odd. While searching through my weapon wheel for the 50th time, just longing for my lasso, I noticed that for some reason, the option to set up camp was available. And so, while Kratos continued beating the shit out of Reverend Swanson, I selected the camp option, and it worked. And that is when I got a really, really good idea. Now, I know exactly what you're thinking, and I also know that you know what this idea is. So, I don't really want to say it out loud because, look, it sounds bad, okay? It sounds bad when you say it out loud. In fact, it sounds kind of evil, which is exactly what our boy Western Jesus isn't. But, you know, I'm just saying, I'm just putting it out there. He can't possibly be held responsible if, you know, the enemy just so happens to stumble over to an active campfire and, you know, just so happens to walk into said campfire and, you know, completely by chance just happens to be burnt to a crisp, okay? That is a freak. Actually in perfect timing. You see, her little brother had apparently run away with a group of radical copycats of Western Jesus. Twisted morals, no lassos, and horses with names like Hank, Dank, and Stank. So I reloaded a save, went back to where I was just before the mission started, and instead of listening to the Phonalonian speak, I chose the disrespectful dialogue options instead to see if it would alter what happens with Jamie's chase.
Are you always this negative and antagonistic, sir?
Right, I'll tell you what, you fat little cunt.
It didn't, and all it did was give me the option to throttle the old man. I didn't want to know what happens if I hit triangle here, so... And at the end of the day, if using the forbidden boomstick was absolutely the only way to save a life, I know for certain that our boy would do it. That was fucking silly, wasn't it? Arthur decided speaking to Thomas would obviously be a good place to start, but rather than being met with friendly conversation, he was instead met with one of Tom's signature outbursts. Now, despite being attacked first, Arthur had no interest in retaliating, especially if it could be avoided. But of course, as always, the game had other plans, and continued prompting us to break every single bone in this fragile man's body. And I mean, look, even though beating Thomas up wouldn't result in a kill or a knockout technically, I still didn't want to beat him senseless for the sake of Arthur's good name. And while it seemed unavoidable at first, eventually I discovered you can get Thomas to move around, and even avoid beating him up completely by simply pressing triangle to pick him up and put him back down. You could argue this might have caused him a bruised tailbone at the very least, but whatever injuries he has once the cutscene activates clearly had nothing to do with Arthur.
Oh shit, what is that?
Now it seemed as if that was that. A simple task for Arthur that was prompted by a random dream that meant nothing. But as Arthur began to lecture Thomas about his random acts of violence, he was cut off by a phrase that completely caught him off guard. "You know, it's funny that you came here today," Thomas said. "A man in my dream told me you would. Told me you've been off trying to undo all of his work. He didn't sound happy at all. I think you've made a bad enemy, Arthur. Real bad. Said it's about time the fun was over. And it was about time that he gave you this."
Understand?
Arthur's good friend Sean had been snatched up by some remaining members of Strawberry Security for public urination. The absolute worst and most punishable crime in the West, but only for alcoholics of his level. You see, the legal system is complicated in the West, but the charge of public urination for him is instead charged as a major environmental violation due to the sheer potency of his, you know. So he, of course, had been sentenced to death. So here I am, weary, but pretty damn happy with the results so far. Here I was thinking this mission was gonna be all stinky and difficult, when in reality, all there was left to do was to wait for Javier to take out these last two enemies. Bang! Cliff Boy down. Boom! Charles bonks Cliff Boy number 2 over the head. One measly cliff dweller remains, and I was ready to run up the rocks and restrain him myself. I was feeling confident. I shouldn't have felt confident. It just makes the pain more painy, the hurt more hurty, and I don't know why I do this to myself every single time. I honestly think the false confidence going into these missions kinda, keeps me going, but this is where the problems really started rolling in. So basically, I wanted to run up the rocks here and restrain this dude quite quickly, because not only was Javier having real trouble hitting anything besides the rock he was sitting behind, but I also knew that too much inactivity from me would result in his death. An important thing to remember for this mission is that if Javier dies or the mission fails, it means going all the way back to square one. So I began running up this hill in hopes that Javier would follow me regardless of the remaining enemy on the cliff.
Did I ever tell you what the definition of insanity is? Insanity is doing the exact same fucking thing over and over again, expecting shit to change.
This was progress, the only drop of it I had experienced for a very long time. It was time to complete this god-forsaken mission once and for all. I restrained one cliff dweller, and then 2 cliff dwellers, and all that was left was the final cliff dweller who wasn't there for some reason. And right here was the most heartbroken I had been in the entire series so far. This moment, right here. Arthur was so obviously broken as well that even the enemies gave him the courtesy of not shooting him, like they were giving him a moment of silence for this absolutely heart-wrenching tragedy. Why did the cliff guy not spawn? Our problems could have been over. Our mission could have been accomplished with 0 knockouts and 0 kills. But this dude just, didn't decide to pull up to work today? Was he late for his fucking shift as an NPC? But honestly, I've got to say, the only saving grace that kept me going back was that damn embankment. It was calling out to me on every attempt. Eyezayar, try running up me again. It'll have a different outcome, I promise you're not going crazy. I was going crazy. And with such impaired judgment, I went right back to it. I don't know how many times I ran up and down that embankment, but you'd think at this point I would have been an absolute expert. But I can assure you that I definitely wasn't. So when I did finally run up it successfully, the sheer luck shocked me beyond belief. You see, now you're probably thinking, Eyezayar, why are you not making a bigger deal of this? Why are you not more hyped? You literally just made it to where you needed to be. The pain was over. Pack it up. You made it. This had happened hundreds of times. Javier killed the next couple of enemies with ease, and I moved forward expecting the same barrage of attacks I had received time and time again. But now, the only bullets flying were those from Javier and the final cliff dweller. Every other enemy stood completely still. Not a single one of them fired. It was almost as if they'd all gained a newfound respect for Western Jesus and his mission. There was no other way to explain it. We'd seen this briefly before when I attempted the rock climbing strategy, but I had absolutely no clue what triggered this. It was like seeing a crowd of sworn enemies that were about to go to war just suddenly embrace the one they'd been hell-bent on destroying. And while this didn't exactly solve our main problem, I definitely wasn't complaining. Every single one of them stood still as Arthur restrained them. And before long, there was only one last obstacle that stood in our way. One last enemy that refused to let us pass.
I'll get you, bitch!
I ran directly for the embankment, completely overshot the platform I wanted to land on, and half expected to fall once again to my death, but I landed safely, on the rock below. I was extremely careful not to move too far forward or jump onto his level at all, as it had caused a mission failure multiple times at this point. And although it meant potentially throwing away this perfect opportunity that had come out of nowhere, I knew what I had to do. Even if it meant attempting this 500 more times, I knew that I had to risk it all to have a chance. I got as close as I possibly could, carefully lined up my throw, and let it go. Right there, I thought I'd lost him, but the cliff dweller survived and teetered dangerously close to a much larger drop. I didn't think that I would get this far, and so any fragment of a plan I had was swiftly thrown out the window. I looked around quickly to search for an out, but it was too late. That was the last time anybody had seen Micah Bell. Disaster came and went. Victories arrived and passed. Time continued to tick by. But Micah Bell remained missing. And at first, there was no call for concern. He had embarked on quite a personal journey after all. A journey that would hopefully grant a better understanding of the power that surged within him. A journey that would hopefully grant him a better understanding of himself. But you see, the boys couldn't help feeling the worry that swelled more and more as the days flew by. Where was their friend sleeping? What was he doing? Was he still taking time to find himself, or had something sinister found him first? To put it simply, the boys just couldn't stand the uncertainty a minute longer, and so began their search for Micah Bell. The boys began their search closest by in Valentine, asking every single passerby they saw. You seen Micah Bell around by any chance? You know, he's got the big white hat with the black jacket. Coldest eyes, but big heart, you know, big heart. You seen him? Nice skin, clear complexion, dude definitely moisturizes. Yeah. And he sort of walks like something bit him on the... You seen a scruffy looking dude with a mustache like the front of a bicycle by any chance? It was pointless. Of course, nobody had seen Micah Bell in Valentine. This was the last place you would go to find yourself. And so the boys decided it would be best if they extended their search just a little bit further. They searched rivers, stables, shacks, and shops. Oceans, mountains, trees, and crops. Bars, the stars, and inside Crocs. Cinemas. They would find him not. Not in prison? The boys were shocked. Did he leave a note? He must have forgot. Did he get shot up by a bunch of cops? Did he go to the tailor for some brand new socks? Saloons and rooms. They wouldn't stop. Was it Tahiti that he did flock? Bedrooms and places with trees to lop. Soon, the boys were all out of spots. Their friend was gone. Vanished. Lost. Perhaps it was time to accept their loss. So they found a spot where they would sob and jumped right down, where the garbage met the moss.
Hey, Arthur. Good to see you.
Immediately, my plan was to just stop the wagon first, tie up all of the enemies, and then escape. That seemed like the most basic approach. And I knew that I could just restart in the event that I did accidentally kill someone, but pulling this guy off the wagon and watching as he was crushed and trampled under the weight of 4 horses and a wagon loaded with supplies gave me an unreasonable amount of anxiety. But he was fine. So I took off again, desperate to catch up to the wagon. If you're waiting for the catch, I'd just like to inform you that you will not be at all disappointed. Because if it is a catch that you're looking for, tell me if you've heard this one before. The enemies die when you take them off their horse. I'm talking instant, not alive mode. On the horse, a ridiculously high damage dealing warrior. Off the horse, wet noodle. Lifeless, wet noodle. And you might be wanting to ask, why? Why would that happen? And I can tell you with the utmost certainty that I have no fucking idea. Let me give you all the rundown real quick. My go-to right now was to stop the wagon as far away from that cutoff point as I could, It's a shame I always have to leave out so much of the things that I attempt in these videos because, I won't lie, it honestly fucking baffles me how genuinely dumb some of the things I try are. And surprise, surprise, nothing I had tried so far was working.
Hurry, get up. I'll drive.
And just like that, the horse bonder was defeated. Simply knocking a horse bonder from their horse disconnects them from the source of their power. This was the first time Arthur had ever encountered a horse bond in action, though he'd heard tales of them in the past and, until now, remained unsure if they'd even existed. As the legend describes, disconnection from their source leaves them weak and easily defeated, because unlike Frank and Arthur, their connections are formed artificially. So you might ask at this point, what exactly was my plan here? And to tell you truthfully, I didn't have one. I somehow forgot that this event even occurred within the same mission, and so I had no prior thoughts at all on how I was going to go about this. But one thing was for sure, there were a lot of people trying to kill the boys. It seemed like an old friend from the past had come back to haunt us, because word of 3 Gun Gary's battle strategies had apparently leaked. Never have I seen the enemies apply pressure like this before. These guys reeked of confidence, constantly converging on my hiding spots, hunting me down. It was honestly fucking terrifying. And the worst part of all was I had no idea when I might be met with a one-shot death. It was just lurking. It could come at any time. And just knowing that it was a possibility, no matter how much progress I made, was severely frustrating. Now look, trust me when I say I would love to present you all with one of those victorious outros, okay? I love doing those. Weston Jesus, Frank the telekinetic horse, Micah the unstoppable, back together once more, side by side in battle, protecting the innocent and crusading against the evil that dare present itself. Those outros are my favorite. But, as unfortunate as it is, I don't think I have one. Because sometimes this game is just really dumb. After a gross amount of attempts at disarming the enemies, lassoing the enemies over and over, only to be killed in one shot for a reason I still could not figure out, the game decided to do something different. I don't know why it did, which is something I find myself saying more and more as this series goes on, but it did. I've looked back on everything I recorded and I still have absolutely no idea what sparked the sudden change, but let me just show you. And you know what, matter of fact, maybe I do have a victorious outro for you. Upon being reunited, our boys had already faced many a challenge. Members of a corrupt organization with powers enhanced by a suspicious and unknown entity tried desperately to stop them, but our trio fought on. And now, additional members of that same cutthroat organization threatened to snip their objectives short once again. But after many attempts, the game decided not to fuck me over and these videos are aging me horribly. Instead of being downed the second I was shot, Weston Jesus suddenly ate bullet after bullet, while Micah served an unholy amount of lead to the enemies that stood before him.
Oh my god, he on X Games mode.
Bodies dropped quicker than 8-year-old me showing off at a school fire drill. Stealing the oil tank was a pretty straightforward objective. Drink a tonic, jump the fence, steal the wagon, right away. It was a simple 4-step plan. Drink a tonic, jump the fence, steal the wagon, get shot to pieces, narrowly miss the innocent puppy, accidentally knock a guard into the dirt, get shot some more, fucking explode. I remembered it clearly. That door, right there, led to whipping someone in the face with a rifle. And it was a knockout I really wasn't looking forward to. It was the worst kind of knockout. A forced knockout. The kind that doesn't budge, the kind that you can't get out of, the kind that locks you into an animation and makes the decision for you.
I like it, cut.
I dedicated so much time to finding a way to get Arthur's rifle out of his hands and onto his back is kind of beyond me at this point, but regardless, I found a way to do it. My thinking here was that maybe, if I didn't have the rifle in my hands when triggering the animation, some sort of holy miracle could occur, allowing me to skip the knockout completely. But let me tell you, okay? After the disgusting amount of time that it took to get this glitch working properly, teeth from that man's face still fucking flew. The gun magically pops into Arthur's hand. I was reminded of yet another reason why I was terrified of this mission.
Probably something in here, Arthur.
Forced Deadeye. Thankfully, seriously, thank Christ that I could put away the rifle and re-equip my lasso here. I was gonna have to get really comfortable with jumping into the fray. I noticed very quickly, however, that I had gone into this mission somewhat ill-equipped. I was dying very quickly due to the lack of cover on the battlefield, and if I was gonna last long enough to really test the limitations of this area, I needed the necessary supplements to hold me through. Which is why I'm proud to announce that this video is sponsored by G Fuel. When Western Jesus is feeling down, he thanks Cowboy Christ that G Fuel's around.
This video nor the Eyezayar channel is sponsored or endorsed by G Fuel.
Loaded with the items necessary to see things through. Now, my first attempt back was very telling of the problems to come. I don't need to hype up that there was a major issue anymore, right? Like, I feel like you guys know by now exactly the dread that these missions bring. This looks like a pretty regular death. A chaotic one, sure, but nothing out of the ordinary. But here, inside this attempt, was the root of the issue. An issue that I actually wouldn't discover was the problem for a very, very long time. I was ready to start creating strategies set within my new parameters. It took me a second to actually get this worked out, but basically, moving beyond this point was a complete no-no. That right there was the border to Failure Town. Cross it and somebody dies. Considering that all of the enemies here lived in Failure Town, the root of my problem was that I had been attacking them in their own territory. What I needed to do was bring them over to my side. Take them on a snazzy little tour of Success City, really show them how stinky Failure Town was. I began doing this Scorpion style, Mortal Kombating the shit out of these fellas, minus the grotesque murder and humiliation. This mission has already been the most difficult to do that for. I'm gonna do my darndest here to explain the entirety of my journey, but it was a bit of a doozy. What made this section so tedious both to complete and to explain is both the inconsistencies and small intricacies it held. Sometimes I'd fail for tying someone up, sometimes I wouldn't. Sometimes the boys could take the enemies down to a final 4, and sometimes all the way down to 3. It was super unpredictable. Maybe not as unpredictable as some missions have been. Fuck that mission, by the way. It's just that certain mission failures were all over the place. It had me so frustrated at one point that I'd resorted to believing a Rockstar employee was just sitting in a room somewhere, flipping the switch that'd make me fail for different reasons. True delusion had just about settled in. There was an attempt that eventually changed everything. The right combination of restraints in the right place at the right time with the right amount of enemies handled by the boys triggered Phase 2 of this nightmare. This part of the mission in particular took me an absolutely feral amount of time to figure out. Phase 2 was basically identical to Phase 1. The only difference was the specifics of what we'd learned before. Specifics as in the fail zones, where you could and couldn't restrain enemies, and how long before the mission decided you weren't being fast enough. Because, see, my eventual return to the core strategy was all-out war. After all my failed attempts, from the moment I began this mission to the attempt you're seeing now, I had the process of my strategies down to a science. What you're seeing here is a weathered man. No, not that kind. That kind. Carefully calculating the necessary moves to abandon this hellscape. All that was required was a little bit of luck and a whole lot of persistence. Rarely was this the case, but Charles actually killed this first enemy rather than him needing to be restrained. The second and third closest enemies, occupying the front lines, met the same fate, but that was when the rarest of all occurrences became a reality. I'd only seen this happen a handful of times before in all of these attempts, an inconsistency that I hadn't successfully taken advantage of yet. An additional enemy, taking cover behind the trees, was pistol sniped by John, triggering the sweet, supple sound of Phase 2 dialogue.
Behind us! We got more of the bastards riding in!
and initiate the completely uncharted Phase 3. The rest of the enemies were positioned much too far for me to lasso them. Too far into the fail zones for me to even consider approaching, actually. But it didn't matter, as John once again proved his fast improving marksmanship and completely obliterated the last 3 enemies with his trademark pistol snipes. I couldn't believe that things had gone so smooth despite the chaos, but at the same time, I also wasn't completely surprised that this eventually worked. And Frank had discovered that not only was this now at the forefront of his priorities, but he'd already gotten started. He had already begun by casting a very wide net. Cases like Frank, the rabbit, the deer who killed Davy had far proved the potential of the animal kingdom's power. And while Frank was an outlier, far more formidable than any other, it wasn't going to deter Cornwall from attempting recreations. If Cornwall were to ever discover their exact location, the repercussions would be catastrophic.
I've let you fools play your little game for far too long. Why I've let it continue for as long as it has is a little bit beyond me now. Maybe I enjoyed watching you struggle to keep up with your impossible endeavors. Leaving you to your own devices has proved quite amusing. But this is no longer time for playing, Morgan. I admire your dedication, really, I do. But apparently my more indirect warnings haven't been clear enough. So allow me to show you with a little more clarity. Your impossible mission is just that. Going forward, there will be no more choices, boy, no. Only consequences. Whatever remains of you afterwards will simply be a product of that fact. So tell me, why would I bother killing you here where you stand, when I can instead break you to watch you crawl?
Western Jesus stands on the edge of disaster. His friends are in mortal danger at the hands of Leviticus Cornwall. His moral code hangs in the balance, teetering scarily close to the point of no return. He's been tricked, fooled, trapped into an impossible situation. No matter which way this goes, his life and the lives of those around him are about to change forever. Hello, Rockstar Games. That's a nice looking mission you've got there, bro. I wonder if you'll design it strictly enough to make me want to stick my face inside a NutriBullet Pro 1000 and switch the bastard on. He literally drops the knife when you shoot it, but grows one back as if Shank's a native to his DNA. I don't like it. I know I'm just being particularly salty here, but this inability to disarm him before he stabs John feels like the biggest slap in the lips when there's literally an animation of the knife leaving his fucking hand. A fork in the road is all that was left in the wake of Leviticus Cornwall's ambush. He was calculated. He knew how to hit Western Jesus right where it hurt most. His friends. This was to be a matter of murder or blatant complicity in the face of his own companion's brutal end. A companion who had shown his undying dedication to save the West alongside Arthur time and time again. But Cornwall, in all his glory, seems to have misunderstood a crucial element of exactly who he was messing with now. This wasn't just Arthur Morgan anymore, this was Western Jesus. This was a soldier constructed out of concrete will. I mean, sure, yeah, complete the game with as few kills as possible, avoid punching people in the face where you can. That's our goal. But the moment Cornwall shoved an ultimatum in the face of Western Jesus, the definition of pure unfuckwithable dedication, he'd already lost. The war ran far too deep for this to set us back now. This had become leagues too personal to simply cut the journey here. John was not a companion that Western Jesus intended on losing. And nor was this a battle he intended to give up on. Mourning the very first kill of the series is a difficult step of the journey, but it is still a step, and our boys simply would not allow the West to be further corrupted, no matter the gravity of the obstacle. I didn't lose hope here though at all, because unlike the portion that just came before it, this seemed to be at least somewhat logical. I know, right? Rockstar Games, logic, fucking rare sight if I ever saw one. No time to admire the scenery though, as the boys are ambushed by the man's captors. I don't have a whole lot to say about this mission, to be honest, but I will say this. Charles is an absolute fucking beast with that bow. He's great here, honestly. He straight up embarrassed the enemies with that thing, which made this a whole lot easier, to be honest.
How about you pull over right now?
Pull over?
That's what I said. Hey, how's about this?
With Sadie behind the reins, her more vicious methods took care of the first enemy. It's really quite sad, but you've been very bad, so go and talk to my dad.
Rock you like a hurricane.
And do not shoot them, you hear me? Okay, now you're talking my language. What the hell are you?
I thought it was pretty smart. It got us fucking nowhere, but I thought it was pretty smart. Basically, using the number keys on PC allows you to pull out various items from your inventory without having to ever use the weapon wheel. So I could actually equip my lasso, even once I entered the carriage and lost the ability to under normal circumstances. I wanted to give myself a fucking pat on the back after this one, I'm not gonna lie to you. I thought my brain was so abnormally large for thinking this one up. But alas, Rockstar Games is a harsh mistress, because hog-tying stooge number 3 effectively does nothing. He just lays there.
Now, if you two don't mind, I'm going to bed.
The job wasn't finished just yet though, no way. There was still a moonshine station to blow to pieces.
My main goal is to blow up.
It's been almost 3 years since we first began this quest. That's 9 episodes following the path of Western Jesus, as he and his companions fight tooth and nail to return peace to a corrupted land. What's round, smelly, slightly burnt, and never fucking moves unless you tell it to? Uncle also had a job. And that's really where things went wrong. That's how we ended up here. As far as bad situations go, this one was pretty up there. The moment the dust settled, Uncle immediately began stating his defense, and in his scattered attempt to save face, he did actually pose a pretty good point. Had he not been asleep on the job in the first place, he may never have noticed that Cornwall wagon at all. The gang may have remained completely oblivious to the devil that was on their doorstep until it was too late. And it was riding the same path every day, by the way. What was up with that? Where exactly was this thing going? Why was it following such a tight schedule? There was clearly only one option here. Dismantle the outpost before they could organize any further. Show Cornwall that this was no longer a viable spot to station his men. And above all else, crush the enemy. Non-lethally, of course, that was still the goal here. Also, Lenny's tagging along on this one, hope you don't mind. You might be wondering why Arthur would bring Lenny along to such a dangerous mission. He's had horrible experiences with him in terms of reliability in the past. I mean, he's still on training wheels when it comes to fighting evil. I did manage to hogtie all the enemies, but when I did, nothing happened. Okay, Lenny, in cases of unforeseen emergencies such as this, the most important thing that you can do is stay calm. Take a breath, analyze the situation, and react accordingly. In the end, all it took to derail this entire attempt was one single enemy who managed to let off one single shot after being untied. Now, This shot didn't kill Lenny Summers. In fact, it didn't even physically hit him. But what it did do is break him.
Whoa! What the hell? There's no escaping now. You surrounded. God damn it. Let's get the hell out of here.
The stress of it all had become too much. Lenny Summers, protector of the West in training, had collapsed under the pressure. Actually, bad choice of words there. He didn't collapse. This was the fastest I'd ever seen him move, honestly. He was running for his life here. Something about that shot, it was the straw that broke the camel's back, the bullet that broke the Lenny's mind. It also didn't help that, to add to the trauma, the man who shot at him decided to slip his running shoes on as well and pursue us across the countryside. Something I should have done way back in mission analysis. See, I'd become convinced early on that the wagon was protecting Lenny from taking too much damage, therefore extending the amount of time he had before the enemies would sap him of all his health. But looking at this reasoning in hindsight, I realized that just isn't true, because that's not how this game works. Companions are given enough health so that you'll pretty much never see them die if you're playing normally. The function is there purely to prevent you from playing in a way you aren't supposed to. Whether it's because you're too far away from your companion, you're taking too long to complete the objective, or because the game thinks you aren't engaged in combat enough, every mission has fail conditions. Lenny wasn't dying suddenly because he was taking too much damage. He was dying suddenly because his health was getting set to 1 after I'd triggered the fail condition by doing something the game didn't like. In other words, the wagon wasn't preventing Lenny from taking too many shots, it was lowering the chance that he'd be hit once the fail condition was triggered. The issue with spending so long without progressing at all was that once the time came, I had no fucking clue what was happening. Lenny had taken out about 5 enemies when things shifted entirely. New dialogue played, Lenny completely ditched his usual cover, and almost as a punishment for the mistakes I'd made, I was met face to face with a Western legend. Some say he was born into this world with a bandolier of high-caliber ammunition hanging from his belly button as a sick substitute for an umbilical cord. Stories tell of a man so addicted to war that he carts his giant gun around with him no matter where he goes. He's said to be the embodiment of destruction, the pinnacle of pain. Lenny, sometimes your most powerful tool will be that of a fresh perspective. For now, I'll spare you the details of why I ended up at Emerald Ranch trying to complete a Strauss side mission to get rid of the Gatling guy, but what I will tell you is that my time there awoke me to something I couldn't believe I hadn't tried. The side mission would only progress if this man was KO'd, and I couldn't tie him up, so ready to just back out and restart the checkpoint, I decided to shoot him. But before I got the chance, upon aiming my weapon, this happened. I didn't know why that happened, I didn't know how, and to be honest, I didn't really care. All that mattered in that moment was the realization that it spawned. Of everything I'd tried against the Gatling guy, I hadn't once experimented with guns.
It's good to see you again, despite the circumstances. shit.
When this strategy was first suggested to me, I was of course against it. Me using a weapon to create a hazard that wasn't there previously, I mean, it just seemed ridiculous. There was almost no room for debate. Any deaths that would result from that would be the player's fault. But the more I thought about it, the more this strategy shifted into the grey area. Because I have completed missions without kills using similar methods in the past. Particularly when a campfire was set up for Kratos to walk himself into. That was never counted as a kill, and I think rightfully so. While slightly controversial, the degree of separation from the player here was enough for me. I did set the campfire up, yes, but the pathing for NPCs is more than competent enough for them to avoid hazards like this. It was the determination Kratos had to beat me to death that walked him into the flames multiple times. Additionally, the campfire itself is not a weapon. It's a tool that becomes a part of the environment once it's activated. If I was to traverse dangerous terrain with an enemy following me, desperate to kill me, and that enemy happened to tumble down a cliff, I would not consider that a kill on our part. Similarly, if I was to flee from an enemy who was chasing me, and they happened to run into the path of a speeding locomotive, I don't believe the blame could be laid at Arthur's bare feet. This of course has its limits though. To tie someone up and place them on the tracks would be outright murder. If I grabbed the enemy and shoved them off the cliff, that too would be my fault. If I'd have set the campfire, grabbed Kratos, and held him to the flame until he melted into a steaming heap, you get the idea. However, this was undoubtedly different, if only slightly. The campfire's intended purpose is to give the player a place to cook, to sleep, to fast travel. The intended purpose of this stick of dynamite is to destroy, to dismember, to kill. But is simply creating the hazard enough for it to count? The dynamite was placed by the player, but never ignited by the player. It was the enemy who fired their gun and the enemy's bullet that ignited the TNT, resulting in the explosion that would kill them both.